So looking at how we use the water, worldwide, the greatest uses of water, the highest is agricultural for irrigation. Got a picture here representing that. And then industry underneath that. And down about 9% here is domestic and municipalities. So domestic, this is coming out of your showers or sinks for you to drink, and then municipality is for electric generation or sewage treatment. Here, if we look in the United States, 41% goes to agriculture, 38% to power and cooling, then 11% to industry, and then public is 10%. But if you look at China, almost 90% of water is used for agriculture, and then about 60% for public and 7% for industry. This is a pretty cool graph looking at water usage, how much water is needed for different items, like an automobile. See, takes about the most, 400 liters to produce. When you go down to grain-fed beef, takes about 7,000 liters. Going down to 1 kilogram of corn, and then paper, and then, what does it say? Steel down below. So looking more at irrigation, irrigation of arid and semi-arid lands, and remember that's arid means desert-like, have become increasingly important for worldwide efforts to produce enough food for increasing populations in these areas. Remember we saw from the home project these irrigation methods in the desert where you have this one sprinkler system that pivots around this point to irrigate these areas. 40% of the world's population lives in these arid and semi-arid areas, mainly Africa and Asia. So one of the big water uses per individual or household is for irrigation. And one way to prevent this consumption of water is by using this this type of landscaping called xeriscaping. And what xeriscaping does is it uses rocks and plants that need very little water for landscaping. And this will actually reduce up to 60% of water bills and 60% of water consumption by using xeriscaping. And xeriscaping will help protect soil from erosion. It reduces weed growth. It incorporates dozens of attractive plants and can reduce household water consumption up to 60%. A lot of xeriscaping can be found in households that live in arid and semi-arid areas like on the west, but some people here in Florida you might see have some form of xeriscaping. Sometimes you can have too much water. And too much water can lead to a couple things, like flooding was the main one, and this is more destructive today because buildings are built in floodplain areas. Floodplains, those are areas where floods occur. That is a certain section on a river that tends to have fluctuating quantities of water. The Mississippi in 1993, because of draining of wetlands and building on floodplains, they had an above-average precipitation during the 6 months of a normal flood cycle, and the levees that are there to hold the floods back failed, and there was a huge flood in 1993. Show you some examples here. Flooding. We've seen flooding because of too much rain from hurricanes here in Florida. And see, if you have this natural river flowing here, when it starts to meander, this meandering part, that's your floodplain. All right. When humans come in and develop, they build these levees, these walls, to protect water from flowing out during these floodplains. But if you get too much water flowing down, they'll go over the levees or either break the levees, and then you'll get what is known as a flood. too little of water, you can have overdrawn surface water, which removes too much fresh water from a river or lake, resulting in increased salinity for associated estuaries, which decrease productivity, like we saw with the San Francisco Bay. You remove that water, and then the salt water intrudes or comes into that area. You also could pull too much water out of an aquifer. You get substances or sinkholes. Might have pronounced that incorrectly, but sinkholes. Say you've got a pocket of water down here, and that's an aquifer. Well, when you bring a well down to there and pull all this water out, you have basically just this hole in the ground. And if you put some heavy mass or like a house on top of it, if you have that empty hole now down there because the water is not there to fill that hole, you'll have land that falls in. Got a couple examples of sinkholes here. And then salinization of irrigated soil. That also has to do with saltwater intrusion. You remove that fresh water from that area, salt water tends to move in. So I keep mentioning the saltwater intrusion, and this diagram is going to explain how that works. So you have your ocean area here that's saltwater, and then you have fresh water and a water table. And a water table is just basically, if you've ever been to the beach, you know what this is. Say you've been on the beach and you dig a hole, and you keep digging that hole down and down, and eventually you hit water, even though you're on the shore some, not in the water. Well, you've hit the water table, and as you move more inland, the water table is lower and lower. Well, it can be, depending on how much land there is before the water table. Well, there's an area called the interface where that salt water that intrudes into the land meets the fresh water. And as you remove fresh water from wells, that fresh water moves back, and that salt water moves in. So that's what that saltwater intrusion is. And if you get salt water into a well, you can't irrigate crops with salt water.